Okay, welcome back to Philosophy Online Lecture. We are still on value inquiry, and so today we'll be looking at morals and responsibilities, and then the idea of good, and then the senses in which uh, the concept of good applies to. Now, when we talk about moral responsibility, we're talking about what we ought to do, our obligations as individuals in the society, and then we won't be able to discuss this without understanding what our normative theory are. That is, we won't be able to discuss what are the uh, right judgments, what are the what how are we going to judge what is good and bad without understanding our normative theory. And our normative theory has to do with the norms, our idea of what is actually normal in the aspect of reason, or through what we have perceived through nature. Now, when we understand this, what is normal, maybe according to reason, according to nature, that is when we cannot make judgments on what are the moral values, or what constitutes morals. And it is from this that we're now going to say, okay, oh, this is our moral obligations in the society. That is after we have understood our normative theory. I hope we get that now. And discussing the idea of good. Now, good can be looked in two senses, that is, in the moral sense and in the non-moral sense. In in the moral sense, it has to do with the moral values, that is, the standard of the good and bad actions in the society. And good in the moral sense deals with people interaction and integration among themselves. It has to do with our characters. It has to do with our emotions. It has to do with our motive, intentions, etc. Now, good in the moral sense has to do with humans themselves and their conduct. Now, it is very important for us to separate the idea of good in the moral sense and from the non-moral sense, that is the non-moral value. Now, I will explain this by saying that there are some good that are to humans, that is that are necessary for our social cooperation, that are morally right, and there are some good that are materials, or they are good in themselves. Now, what do I mean? Like, an example of a non-moral value is like a car. Now, if you have a car, is a good thing, but if you do not have a car, it doesn't mean that is a bad thing. So the idea of good shouldn't be confused with things like this. Now, if you hold the position, it is a good thing. If you do not hold that position, it is not a bad thing. Now, this is where how we are looking at good in the non-moral value. Now, good in the moral value has to do with our characters. It has to do with our moral values. It has to do with how our conduct in relation with other people in the society. And in the non-moral value, in the other sense in which we look at good, it has to do with and those more about materialistic things, or things that are good for themselves. Now, knowledge also is a good in itself. Now, it's under non-moral value, because some might have, some might not have. It doesn't. Some people have knowledge, but they don't have good characters. So that is an example of the point that knowledge is not under the moral value. Okay, and also it is important for us not to confuse the idea of good in moral value with the non-moral value in terms of pleasure. Now, pleasure shouldn't be confused as what is good now. Like the Epicurean said that pursue pleasure, that means pursuing what is good. Now, this is not uh, always direct in meaning. That is, it could be misleading. There are some pleasure that are not good. There are some pleasure that are bad. So we ought to understand and not confuse good with pleasure. As in, the idea of pleasure is ambiguous and it could be misleading. So that is that on moral and responsibility, and the idea of good, the senses in which we can look at what the concept of good is, and what it applies to. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you got value for your time.